For more than 4 hours, U.S. envoy Jared Kushner pressed Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to move forward with the Gaza peace plan. Fresh from a rare meeting with a senior Hamas official, Kushner was sent to Israel today to get Netanyahu on board with Trump's 15-point plan. He urged the prime minister to, quote, not create obstacles. That is according to one Israeli source. But with elections looming in Israel, Netanyahu appears unpersuaded. Over 1,200 Palestinians have been killed since a ceasefire was agreed to 10 months ago, and the future of Gaza still hangs in the balance. For more on all of this, let's bring in CNN's Jerusalem bureau chief Oren Lieberman. So, Oren, it is reported that in addition to Jared Kushner and the prime minister, Trump's Gaza envoy Nikolai Mladenov and former British Prime Minister Tony Blair and U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee were in these meetings that the Israeli Prime Minister's office described as deep and constructive talks. The takeaway appears so far that Israel can continue to carry out targeted strikes in Gaza while working groups get stood up, one on disarmament, one on sanitation and clean water. How should we interpret this meeting today?
Well, it's very difficult to see if there's any clear path forward here, although there certainly are positive statements from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office, as well as from the Board of Peace, whose director, Nikolai Mladenov, was in there. And we're waiting to see if Jared Kushner puts out a statement himself after the meeting. And part of the challenge here is that we are seeing the Board of Peace come out on what is very much Israel's side, saying that before there are any steps towards reconstruction or the withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, there has to be a complete disarmament of Hamas, including heavy weaponry, light weaponry, and that needs to take part in a process and be confirmed. That process would be, at least according to what we're hearing after the meeting, led by an American general. Israel has refused to conduct any sort of withdrawal until the complete disarmament of Hamas. And it's because of that that we saw Netanyahu reject the 15-point peace plan that President Donald Trump hailed as a major breakthrough at the end of last month. The challenge there is that though Hamas has, at least in principle, agreed to a disarmament plan, they've made clear they're not doing that unilaterally. They're not willing to simply do that on their own, with no sequenced withdrawal of Israeli forces and with no halt to the near daily Israeli attacks in Gaza. Given those positions, Israel not willing to make any steps until the complete disarmament of Hamas, Hamas not willing to take any steps without sequenced Israeli steps, it's unclear that there really is a path forward here. That being said, according to a Board of Peace official, it's clear whose position they're taking here. They said, and I'll quote from some comments they made after the meeting, they said, quote, the Israelis are going to give this a chance. Now it's up to Hamas to show if it truly intends to comply. And what's interesting about that statement, beyond it, is that it contrasts completely with a joint statement by a number of Arab and Muslim countries that came out on Sunday afternoon, which blamed Israel and Netanyahu's rejection of the 15-point plan for the impasse here. So we are still effectively at the same point we've been now for months, which is that each side is blaming each other, and it's not clear what the real path forward is here, and that leaves Gaza in the state it's been in basically since the ceasefire 10 months ago.
And we're today talking about a meeting between the Prime Minister and Jared Kushner. Over the weekend, an even rarer meeting, and that was between Jared Kushner in Cairo, Egypt, with President Sisi alongside senior members and leadership of Hamas. What did we learn about what came out of that meeting?
We haven't learned nearly as much about that meeting. It is only the second known meeting between Kushner and Hamas. The first was actually 10 months ago in the run-up to the 20-point ceasefire plan that ended the Gaza war and saw the release of the remaining Israeli hostages. This one actually took place in El Alamein, so north of Cairo, and it was an important meeting. Kushner also met with the Egyptian president. Kushner is trying to get, and he was also joined by Nikolai Mladenov, Kushner is trying to get concrete steps forward here. They're trying to move forward on what is a very stalled ceasefire plan. There's been little movement on the 20-point plan since back in October, effectively since the release of the hostages, an exchange and release of Palestinian prisoners. And that, frankly, is why there had to be another 15-point plan that was put out at the end of July. That too has stalled. It hasn't really gone anywhere here. Kushner is looking for, and the Trump administration is looking for, some sort of actionable plan here to keep this ceasefire alive. And though it may not be officially dead, it's not clear that it's really moving forward at this point.
And Oren, this all comes as Israelis are just weeks away from a very important and consequential election in Israel. It is notable, given the ties between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, that President Trump hasn't come out officially and endorsed the Prime Minister ahead of these elections. At one point, he was very popular in Israel. I'm speaking about President Trump, much more popular than Prime Minister Netanyahu. I know his approval rating has gone down a bit, but given how important this relationship is for the Prime Minister, I'm just wondering what you're hearing about the pressure or perhaps the wiggle room that President Trump is willing to apply to the Prime Minister at this point.
Trump definitely seems to be aware that in the background of trying to push forward this ceasefire plan, there are Israeli elections. And Netanyahu, from his own perspective, cannot be seen to be making concessions to Gaza. That would largely be viewed by the Israeli public as making concessions to Hamas. Netanyahu notably 3 years ago promised a total or complete victory over Hamas, and that has very much failed to materialize. So making concessions towards Gaza and Hamas right now could potentially be very damaging to Netanyahu. In fact, according to an Israeli source familiar with the discussions between Kushner and Netanyahu, Netanyahu said any concessions now would be, quote, problematic for him to make. So that gives you the Israeli challenge of it. You're absolutely right that Trump has not come out and endorsed Netanyahu yet. That is very frequently covered and noted by the Israeli media. In fact, it may be part of the reason that we haven't seen big Trump-Netanyahu billboards in Israel as we've seen in the past. Trump, you're right to point out, is not nearly as popular as he was, and Israelis view the ceasefire with Iran and the agreement with Iran as largely American capitulation to Iranian demands. And that all factors into how Netanyahu views the politics around not only Iran, but also the ceasefire with Gaza. And he's not likely to make any major steps, potentially any steps at all, towards Gaza and towards the ceasefire plan ahead of the elections. They did agree to stand up 2 working groups on sanitation and on disarmament, but those are working groups, and we'll see if they deliver anything anytime in the next few weeks or months.
Kushner is not a formal government employee, and Hamas is a group we did not used to deal with directly as they were deemed a terrorist group. What do you think is remarkable about this face-to-face meeting?
I got to tell you, Adi, it is a real stunner. It is shuttle diplomacy of a nature. But it's also a political move by the president. Basically, Bibi Netanyahu is walking in between Itamar Ben-Gvir on his far right and Donald Trump, the person he needs an endorsement from to stay in office in the elections on October 27th. And so for Kushner, this is a new Hamas leader. He's been around for a few weeks. He was deputy before. Who knows how long he'll be around going forward.
And you mentioned Ben-Gvir, like someone who has talked about.
And Ben-Gvir said, let's kill dozens of people every day, right? So a very hard right position for now. He needs Ben-Gvir, however, to win prime minister next time. So Kushner is going to really lean into
I also don't understand what the leverage is, meaning I don't understand the leverage the U.S. has to make Hamas disarm, one, and I don't know the leverage they have to make Israel back off. Right now, Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu said that we're 60% of the territory of the Gaza Strip. They are also in the middle of building a berm, like a multi-length kind of earthen wall in between. I don't know what Kushner is supposed to be doing here.
So I think the huge challenge is that Bibi has in the past caught Trump off guard, frustrated Donald Trump with military actions that he's taken. And so this is a very clear example of the fact that Kushner is not going in with the U.S. and Israel in lockstep trying to convince Hamas on this 15-point plan. He's actually going into both right now, trying to convince both on the 15-point plan that's within the best interest of the United States. And I don't think he has, quite frankly, Audie, to your point, leverage on either side.
Right.
That is unusual. Typically, I'd look at the conflict over the past few years at this point. It's more so been the U.S. and Israel in lockstep trying to go to Hamas and figure something out. That's not necessarily where we're at here.